Democratic State Representatives John Bryant and Rafael Anchia of Dallas. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
So first, I have to ask, what do you make of the Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan, and the fact that he really squeaked a victory by this past May 28th? What was your sense of that? And Representative Anchia, let's start with you.
Sure. What we're witnessing is a blood sport on the Republican side. You've got just folks who I've served with for a long time who are very, very conservative, somehow getting outflanked to the right by members who are candidly represent just a small fringe of Texans. And on our side, you've got Democrats who are united, ready to play an important role in the next legislative session, ready to make common sense policies for Texans that are going to uplift our entire state.
Representative Bryant.
Well, I think it's a sea change. I like Rafael's characterization of it, but we've never seen a situation before where out-of-state billionaire money was given to the governor to help him defeat Republicans in the Republican primary, Republicans who had voted with him on everything except vouchers. But it wasn't enough. 99% is not enough with this new extreme element that controls the Republican Party. And he spent that money and he defeated them, not on the issue of vouchers, but if you look at the campaign that he ran, he accused them of not supporting him on property taxes and immigration, which was false. And they know that because they did support him on those issues. It is something I've never seen before in all of my years of public life.
And let me ask you just about Speaker Phelan. He says that he's going to remain Speaker, but do you both intend to vote for him, and do you think other Democrats will support him? Representative Bryant, let's start with you on this question.
I'll be voting for a Democrat for Speaker of the House unless some accommodation that's meaningful is made to protect some Democratic priorities, particularly public education. And I don't know that I see it likely that he's able to reach any type of accommodation with us like that, but I'm certainly open to it. He is a fair person on the floor of the House. He runs the House according to the rules, but he's a Republican and he's committed to their agenda. And as you saw in the last session and in the previous session, a whole series of the worst things that you can imagine passed under his speakership. So I think we have to be realistic about that, and that'll be my position.
Representative Anchia?
Yeah, like John, I'm open to it, but we really do need a person who's going to protect the House as an institution and stay true to the ideals that have made the House great, which means that members of the minority are accorded committee chairs in proportion to the partisan makeup of the House. That's something we've had in place for a long time under Democratic and Republican speakers. And that'll be a major point for all Democrats, I believe. And in addition to that, the policy outcomes are going to be relevant. I mean, the reality is that the people who are coming at the speaker represent just a small sliver of Texas. And, there's a wide swath of policies that'll uplift people in our state, like public education. I mean, we were able to rally just a few sessions ago around fully funding public education. What a novel concept, right? That's something that I think all Texans want, and it keeps that infrastructure of opportunity available for the successor generation. That's really what we need in this state.
Let me follow up on the Democratic committee chairs, because as you know, this was a very big issue within the Republican Party primary. And so what do you think can be done to preserve that? Representative Anchia?
Well, for the people who rail against it, I find it odd that they also hate Washington, right? And at the same time, they want to emulate Congress. But that's not the only reason to keep Democratic committee chairs. In fact, we represent millions of Texans across this state. And if people want good policy outcomes, then you need everybody involved in the decision-making process. And then finally, the same people who say that they want only Republican committee chairs also want the process to move quicker. Well, if you want that to happen, there's a nitsy little thing called the Texas Constitution that requires things to move slowly unless you have the consent of all the members, right? So if you actually want to get things done in the House, you need Republicans and Democrats to move things along. And so, you know, I think today it would be no committee chairs. Tomorrow it would be no vice chairs. Then after that, it would be no bills. Then after that, it would be, you know, no members, ultimately, no votes. And so it's really a slippery slope. And I think we need to consider the ramifications of this beyond just one session or one party in power, but really about what's good for the state. When I talk to other people across the country about the fact that we have the Democratic committee chairs or members of the minority who are committee chairs, both Republicans and Democrats overwhelmingly like that idea. If you have Republicans in a blue state, they're like, that's a really good idea because it would give us an opportunity and the people we represent to be reflected in policy. So there are all kinds of reasons to keep it. And I think the institution will endure long after a Republican or Democratic speaker is in place.
Representative Bryant?
I think Rafael's points are very persuasive and represent an effort to try to maintain what historically has been a House that functioned in a fairly bipartisan manner until recent years. The only place where I would depart is that in the current political environment, committee chairs, appointing Democratic committee chairs has not served to prevent them from devastating the things that Democrats believe are important. First, public education, which has not received the kind of funding that it ought to receive. We're 42nd in the nation, and now they're trying to take further money away from it with vouchers. Our commitment to diversity, equality, and inclusion, they have repealed that and required the firing of everybody who is being involved in that. So the existence of Democratic committee chairmen in the last two sessions really hasn't made any difference. I'm more interested in commitments on policy. And if we can get the chairman, that's great. But what we really need to focus on is the policy outcome. If a Republican priority is going to be would normally be sent to a committee chaired by a Democrat, the speaker will simply send it to another committee. He doesn't have any prohibition on doing that and send it to where a Republican is chairman. So we don't really gain much protection from that in this environment. There was a time in which it was quite meaningful. And I don't want to give up entirely on that, but I think we have to be hard-nosed and recognize where we are.
You both spoke about school choice, and Governor Abbott, as you know, said after this past primary runoff, said that he believes he's got the votes to pass school choice. If that's so, how do you intend to block it? Representative Bryant.
Well, first, he only has 76 votes. We've done a careful count of them. If everybody stays where they are, and based on the promises made by the candidates that will be new members, he only has a 1 vote margin on that. If I'm off by 2 or 3, it's still narrow. First, we intend to defeat Republican incumbents with Democratic challengers and increase our numbers. Right now, it's 86 to 64. We have 43% of the members, and we're going to work very hard to try to win elections and increase our numbers. Second, we'll have to employ all of the parliamentary tools that are at our disposal, if they intend to follow the rules this time, and they have talked about abandoning even that. It will depend on who the speaker is. And I guess third, utilize the times in which 100 votes are required to do something, to negotiate in return for giving them 100 votes, doing what we would like to see done on public education.
Representative Anchia.
Yeah, the bottom line is that vouchers are wildly unpopular. I mean, if you put it on the ballot, it would fail. No question. That's why the governor is trying to run the straight in the Republican primary, where he could bring hundreds of millions of dollars to bear around the state to try to make a difference. Because if he knows that he has to run a statewide campaign on this, he loses. Full stop. bottom line. And we've said, hey, okay, you want to do vouchers? Let's put it on the ballot. But they don't want to do that. They know it's unpopular. They know that this is going to benefit a small sliver of Texans at the expense of public school children. So they don't do it that way. They're just trying to run it through the Republican primary. And, you know, in the end, I think this slim margin is not going to hold. I think there are going to be some gains in November that are going to change the calculus once again, as John said. And I further think that when it really comes down to it, we're not going to get a voucher bill that both the House and the Senate agree on and that the governor agrees on. It's really hard to pass a bill, Jack. You know, people think that the legislative process is a bill passing machine. It's a bill killing machine. There are a million ways to kill a bill and only one way to pass it. So to get something through the House, through the Senate, and then acceptable to the governor is a tall order. I think vouchers are going to have a tough hill to climb this next session.
I want to follow up on something you said before I ask you about public education and teacher raises, and that is flipping Republicans into Democratic seats. What seats do you have in mind? And Representative Bryant, I'm going to ask you since you mentioned that first.
We have two very strong challengers in Dallas County for the two remaining Republican seats. Dallas County is blue now, and we think we can pick those up. We have a good challenge underway in Brownsville. We have a challenge underway in the district that extends from Laredo to Uvalde. That is to say, we're competing there to keep a Democratic seat. And we have a very good challenge underway in San Antonio. That's just a few of them.
And Representative Anchia, just your thoughts on that. I mean, how it's a difficult climb to flip seats too, isn't it? I mean, if you look in Dallas County, Representative Meyer and Representative Angie Chen Button, they have survived, and their districts have even been less Republican before, and they still eked out a victory. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not going to talk about specific members, but the reality is that gerrymandering works. I mean, it's worked now for a couple of decades here in Texas. I've served when it was 76 Republicans and 74 Democrats, where we had one seat that was essentially decided by a coin flip. So I've seen virtual parity in the House and see how good that works for the state of Texas. Yeah, beating incumbents in the legislature is tough. In addition to gerrymandering, the unlimited, you know, well of money that incumbents have is really Republican incumbents especially is really powerful. But you know, I think it is less about individual seats than what's happening on the national stage. Candidly, I mean, if the bottom falls out of Donald Trump, you know, who has 34 counts under which he's been convicted. He's a convicted felon. If the bottom falls out in September, October, November, you know, it doesn't matter what individual members do in their districts or the money or the gerrymandering. The tide just gets too high for people. I've seen this go both ways. National politics has a big impact. And so I think you have a historically weak Republican presidential candidate who has a very strong base of support in the Republican primary, but really not a lot of crossover, and where the electorate is largely baked. If there's a move, even 5% one way or another, it's going to make a big difference. The last thing I'd point out is that Texas continues to get more competitive. I mean, I remember when President Obama lost by 16 points, then Hillary Clinton lost by 9.5, and now Joe Biden only lost the state by 5.5. The trend line is moving in our direction statewide. It'll largely be national politics determining what happens locally.
And my last question to both of you, and really appreciate your time, and that is just about public education, school funding, and teacher pay raises. And when I spoke with Republican legislators and candidates during the run-up for the primaries and then again on the runoff, everybody says they support boosting teacher salaries and school funding for the most part. And so I'm wondering, is that something you think will get done separately from school choice next session?
Well, we did that last session. We passed a bill, you know, we passed a bill off the House floor. Ultimately, it didn't move forward, which I think was a colossal mistake, where we didn't have vouchers and we had very high levels of school funding. Now, Jack, I just want to reframe the debate here. This is really not about teacher pay raises. This is about teachers not getting fired. I mean, when I go to the schools in the district that I represent, principals are having to make tough calls because of deficit budgets that they're operating under. I mean, yes, we all want our teachers, to get raises. There's no question about it. My mom was a public school teacher and did amazing public service. But right now, the environment that we're in, with money in the bank, we're going to see teacher layoffs throughout the state. That's going to adversely hurt the families of school-age children. And gosh, I wish that were the scandal that it should be statewide. That really, with money in the bank, we're going to let teachers get laid off, and we're going to let students and families suffer as a result. That's awful.
Representative Bryant.
Well, we have a school system that, just to bring it up to average in the United States with regard to the state effort to support public schools, would require the entire surplus of the last session, $30 billion. That's how far behind we are. We're 42nd in spending on public education from the state level. It is, as Rafael said, a scandal that we're having to argue over simply providing the same level of funding that they received last year in order to stay alive. All the districts now are drawing on their reserves, basically operating in a deficit situation to operate, including the Dallas Independent School District, which has continued to do a good job anyway, but can't do it again without state funding. You ask whether or not we think there will be state funding. I think the governor will veto state funding unless he gets his way on vouchers. And we're going to probably end up in special sessions and playing poker on this issue all the way to the end of the year next year.
Democratic State Representatives John Bryant and Rafael Anchia of Dallas. Thank you both very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.